Alright lads, I'm back to answer another question that absolutely nobody was asking. Can you beat Dead Island Riptide completely as a pacifist? No killing, no attacking, those are the rules. Now I do already have a video of me attempting this challenge on the first Dead Island, but today we're taking on Dead Island 1.5. You know, while we wait for the actual Dead Island 2 to finally release. Now right away you'll notice that I chose to play as Sam B, and that's purely for this skill right here. Backfire. When Sam B gets knocked to the ground, that enemy's damage is reflected back to them, and it's even multiplied by 3, so you can probably see exactly where I'm going with this. And since in Riptide, all new characters start at level 15, I didn't even have to grind any XP to unlock the skill this time. Backfire was pretty much the bread and butter of this challenge. It's a completely pacifist way to get enemies to damage themselves, and if anything, I'm the victim here. So the first fight was pretty much just a montage of me getting pimp slapped before barely escaping, dodging some infected, and making my way up to the main event. A massive battle against a giant horde of different zombies. Now look, I started off pretty strong by getting the suicider to blow himself up and deal a bunch of explosive damage to the zombies, but then my plan quickly changed and I ended up just hiding behind the strong military men and letting them do the rest of the work for me. And I tell you what, it was going pretty well until the main man Sam Hardy was killed, although I did notice that the other lads were still firing shots and going on a rampage, so I waited to see if they'd be able to kill the boss, and sure enough they dropped him. I mean, Sam B even got so bored of waiting that he started whistling to his own hit song. Alas, I still had to restart the checkpoint and try again, but this time I did get a little bit more involved as a human pinata, and Sam Hardy managed to stay alive this time. It turns out this area is also where you get the stun bomb blueprint, which will become super important later on. The final step to complete the prologue was to duke it out with the captain, and at this point, it's probably worth mentioning that in order for me to get knocked to the ground and deal backfire damage, I need to be out of stamina, and the easiest way to do this is to perform a bunch of jump kicks, but for some reason that move doesn't drain nearly as much stamina as it does in the first game. Regardless, I let the captain finish himself off and I washed up ashore on Palanai Island. I met a friendly face named Harlow who instructed me to head to the nearby Paradise camp. And of course, it was overrun by a giant horde of zombies. Now the zombies themselves weren't really an issue, the real problem was all of the human survivors being grappled. If a single human NPC is grappled for too long and that timer runs out, the mission fails. And since attacking wasn't an option for me, actually interrupting those grapples required a little bit more thinking outside the box. In the end, I just dealt with it the way that I deal with all my life's problems, by running away, and sure enough, it worked! If you run a certain distance away from the NPCs, the grappling animation is just completely broken, and that character's position is reset. This whole process was made a lot easier by the fact that some of those NPCs are actual beasts in combat. After the mission was completed, I now had access to the camp's vendors, including Wayne, who sells stun bombs, so I pretty much just spent whatever money I had stocking up on these. After that, I carefully drove my way to Halai Village, found a boat, fitted an engine into that boat, and then ditched the boat. Because honestly, what is the point of this quest? I mean, the place you have to get to is just around the corner, and using a boat attracts nearby drowners. Anyway, with our sights set on Henderson, we went to find a guy named Marcus for reasons that honestly, I don't entirely remember, and of course, he was located in a dead zone. Now, if you don't know, dead zones were a new feature in Riptide that consists of huge hordes of zombies and one champion monster, essentially just a bigger, more mutated version of the zombie types that we already know and love. This particular dead zone contained a butcher, the toughest enemy in the entire game. Once all of the walkers up top had been baited down into the water, I jumped down and acted as a human punching bag for about 45 minutes, with the added bonus that every time I got knocked down, I drowned a little. Yay. I guess on the upside, the butcher's attacks do drain stamina, so it did make it that much easier for me to get knocked over. Now's probably a good time to mention that due to the way the checkpoint system works in Dead Island, dying doesn't really affect my progress in most situations, so it literally didn't matter if I died during this, and trust me, I died a lot. Seriously, this guy is an absolute tank? Plane? Helicopter? Ship? How are you gonna roll with today's sponsor, War Thunder? Well, I've got good news. You can use them all, because this dang game has over 2,000 different vehicles to choose from. Every one of these bad boys is fully customizable and even modeled right down to their individual components, all of which are modeled on real historic vehicles spanning from the 1920s to the good old 2020s. I'm personally really into World War II history, so I do appreciate the detailed selection of vehicles they've got from so many different countries. Now, once you've found the right vehicle for you, it's time to take it into battle battle, and War Thunder offers a range of intense PvP experiences that cater to all playstyles. So whether you're looking for something fast-paced and action-packed, or a bit more of a realistic and tactical experience, War Thunder has got you covered. So use my link below to sign up for free on PC, PlayStation, or Xbox, and score yourself a colossal bonus pack, including a premium account with premium vehicles, boosters, and more. So, after taking care of the tanky boss, I rescued Marcus, who told me to fetch some supplies in another dead zone. This one had an actual staircase, so I just spent a good 20 minutes or so baiting the enemies over the edge again and again, which honestly was a pretty satisfying way to clear them out. I ran into a crazy screaming man.
Thanks for your help. Come on in. Bastard! Ah! Bloody long pick!
Then I returned to Paradise, and for some reason Marcus started doing that Desperate Housewives thing where they burn down each other's houses all the time. I may or may not have started rewatching Desperate Housewives recently. Anyway, survivors started getting grappled all over again, and this time I couldn't use my usual tactic of just running away because all of the exits were covered with fire that acted as an invisible barrier. And so I had to get a little inventive, and I used some tech that my friend Crayfish the Arrowed and I discovered back in the OG days of Dead Island. Getting knocked out of bounds, whether it's using a bomb or just getting punched in the face by a zombie, getting knocked to the ground is a pretty consistent way to breach invisible barriers, and as expected, it worked like a charm on the first try. Now I'm not gonna lie, at this point I was feeling like a certified Dead Island genius, until it was revealed that Techland were 2 steps ahead of me this whole damn time. Or were they? It turns out not only was I still able to successfully reset everyone's grapples, but the game even respawned me outside the camp, so I didn't even have to breach the fire again. This right here led to perhaps the strangest phenomenon in this entire challenge, the Call of the Void. Zombies were still spawning outside the camp, of course, and I found that if I stood in a very specific spot, any zombies that were aggroed onto me would just run into the shallow water and commit seppuku. So I just stood and I watched as walker after walker, infected after infected, and even a butcher just spontaneously gave up on the challenge. It also turns out that if I just ran a little bit further, I could successfully reset the grapples, so I sat there with my popcorn, I watched some zombie fireworks until there was just one thug left, so I lured him through the fire, and he ended the same way. At that point, Harlow finally showed up with a big old chainsaw. Just glad she was on our side. Next up, I met Dr. Kessler, who needed me to take care of some special infected scientists in the Bioderm, and this is where the game introduces a whole new type of infected, the Grenader. And honestly, I kinda liked these guys, because I could use them to kill other zombies for me. And after getting them to eliminate a few walkers, I had the genius idea to get the Grenader bosses to kill each other. And yeah, it didn't work. So I went back to being bitch slapped. Once that was taken care of, the next objective was to clear out a sunken temple. So I used the terrain to my advantage and got a bunch of zombies to just jump or even flip to their death, and I let the rest of them just punch themselves in the face. Until I got to the boss, that is. Quick death. You see, the thing about this guy is that he heals every time he successfully lands an attack, and it turns out he heals more than the actual backfire damage itself, so I could not use the backfire method, and it turns out he was also too big to take fall damage within the temple. I tried my best to escape and come up with a new strategy, but it very quickly became apparent that he doesn't have a de-aggro range. This cheeky bugger will chase you to the end of the island. So naturally, I panicked, and I screamed and I ran around until I found a pool of electricity where I just let Mother Nature take care of the rest. The next step was to retrieve a water pump and a turret while avoiding running over any of the drowners in the boat, before starting another wave defense mission. You're supposed to use the mounted machine gun and the fences to get the job done, but I just did the same old standing back and letting the NPCs do all the work while I occasionally ran away to reset the grapples. Now, some of the NPCs were a bit more helpful than others, and the whole process took nearly an hour. But with that out of the way, it was time to pump out all of the water and embark on the mandatory Techland Sewers mission. I swear to God, it's in every game. But I tell you what, it was a bit of a breeze since I could just zoom past most of the enemies except for a thug boss zombie, so that did take a little bit of a while, but there was a twist at the end of the tunnels. We encountered our first human enemies with guns. Now, if you watched my Dead Island 1 video, you remember that backfire damage doesn't really work on ranged enemies since they have no way of knocking you to the ground, and even when you have 0 stamina, they just straight up execute you. No knockdown, no backfire damage. So I summoned my right-hand slave Crayfish the Arrow to revisit an old tactic. You see, every time you die in co-op, your partner has a chance to revive you before you respawn, and this little revive window is considered a knockdown. So my pocket healer just hid behind a wall and stabbed me with a medkit over and over as we slowly watched the leader's health go down. And thankfully, the leader was the only human that I had to kill in order to get some keys and proceed with the story, so I kicked my little helper from the game and I soldiered on with my mission. Oh no, surprise! One of the survivors was concealing a zombie bite from the group. That's never happened before, and actually, it was our friendly stun bomb vendor Wayne. He transformed into a new zombie type called the Wrestler, and of course, I had to be the one to put my boy down. I started out with the classic cheeky backfire tactics, but they weren't really working so well, so instead, I used the environment to my advantage and I got him to volunteer to put himself on the menu, although I might have overcooked him slightly. Now what came next is usually one of the coolest moments in the entire game, but it's also one that I was just dreading for this challenge. The Ferry Station. You see, this is where you discover that the virus has been mutating inside you and that you have superpowers, like not just Fury mode, but Super Fury mode. It's usually a really cool sequence where you're invincible and you get to just go on a rampage while listening to Sam B's music. I was pretty convinced that there was no way to get out of this rage mode, and since I don't receive damage in that rage mode, I can't use the backfire method, so I came prepared and I brought an army of undead with me. Luckily though, I was wrong. It's definitely just a time-based thing and only lasts about 45 seconds, so now it just came down to a battle of the AI, humans versus zombies. And spoiler alert, the zombies won. The reward was another, even longer wave defense mission, and you already know how I dealt with this, but there were some highlights, like Henry Boyle going on a rampage, Shun Mei exercising a poltergeist, a butcher gangbang, the introduction of the witch, or the screamer, or whatever. It's a Left 4 Dead zombie. They're all Left 4 Dead zombies. Harlow even blew up a propane tank, which I hadn't seen before, and it was about this time that I noticed the gun NPCs deal like 3 times the damage, but their accuracy is awful. Anyway, we took the ferry to Henderson, where I had to kill like 10 zombies to clear the area out, including a thug, so they took their sweet time just teaching themselves a lesson until the last zombie was one of those fake dead ones that jump up and jump scare you. And no matter how close I got, he wouldn't wake up. He wouldn't jump scare me, so I used a stun bomb, which doesn't deal any damage, and it turns out he actually was dead the whole time. I guess you're just supposed to check for the quest. After going through all that effort, we stayed in the new safe zone for a grand total of 3 minutes before migrating to the local cinema. I climbed up to the rooftop of the cinema, I let the infected show themselves the door, and I lured all the walkers up to some electricity. There was another one of those fake dead zombies sitting on a chair, so I woke him up with a cheeky stun bomb, closed the shutters, and I set up camp in our new home. I was getting pretty comfortable, by the way. I was just ready to grab some popcorn and a jump drink and chill, but no, I had to get sent over to a military base filled with landmines. But I did use those landmines to my advantage. Hell, I even took out a wrestler that way, and then I made sure the area was clear of any enemies before I set off some bombs to break into the security building. And now it was time to face off against probably the most annoying boss so far, Meat Thrower. I locked the infected on the other side of the door, and I just got my ass beat repeatedly for an hour. The reason it took so long is because backfire damage can only be dealt by his melee attack, which knocks me to the ground, and most of the time, he was just living up to his name. It also didn't help that he had a massive amount of health. But I persevered, I got it done, and then I had a Zoom call with some guy who said he was sending a rescue chopper my way, so I went to the rooftop of the cinema and I set a bunch of film on fire to create some signal smoke. Now apparently the signal smoke was attracting a bunch of zombies, even though I couldn't see or hear any, so I went ahead to the nearby town square and I blasted some sick beats to keep them distracted. When I got back, the chopper arrived, but then Logan just pulled a bloody rocket launcher out of nowhere, and suddenly the zombies were here anyway. Now on the surface, this seemed just like all the other wave defense missions I'd already done, but this time I really could not leave to reset the grapples. But luckily for me, I spent all my cash on stun bombs before Wayne became a WWE superstar, and so I had a reliable pacifist way to save my friends. Other than that, it was just a matter of leading the zombies through fire and electricity while everyone else did their part. Although I will say I had to restart this goddamn mission twice because the zombies kept getting stuck inside the dang walls and I had no way to damage them. But it was during one of these restarts that I realized that I could bait most of the walkers and the infected into nosediving into some concrete, so I really wish I'd thought of that sooner, but it worked like a charm. Oh well, Time to investigate the helicopter wreck, I guess. I did some COD Zombies training and locked any door behind me that I could until I found a wounded pilot from the helicopter. You can tell Techland put a lot of attention to detail here, and obviously he's paralyzed because only his face is moving. Anyway, he was basically like, hey yo, Frank Serpo's a bitch, but when I found Serpo, I couldn't interact with him until I leaned in for a kiss.
Fuck Serpo.
And so, we fell in love. He let the gang and I move in with him, and I gathered some construction tools because the place needed some work. Although one thing led to another, and I may have sent an explosive bulldozer through a blockade filled with zombies, but it was just a cutscene, so it's okay, it doesn't count. I parkoured my way around all kinds of boss zombies, jumped down an elevator shaft, and started up the final boss fight, Harlow. And yeah, she destroyed me immediately. Of course, she had a gun, so that meant I couldn't backfire her at this point, but it wasn't long until I found a few places to keep her stun locked with fire. And then it was pretty much just a waiting game of like 3 to 4 hours. Eventually though, she entered her second phase, where she injects herself with a mutagen and pulls out a big old chainsaw. Now it turns out she's also immune to fire while she's in this state, so that strategy quickly went out the window. Naturally, I tried to go back to the backfire method, but that still wasn't working because her chainsaw doesn't knock you to the ground. And to make matters even worse, anytime I tried to run away from her, she'd throw Molotovs at me, which I guess explains the fire resistance. Otherwise, I could just get her to Molotov herself. It was time for Plan Z. My boy Crayfish joined me again, this time as Sam B with the backfire skill, and now, anytime either one of us died, it would count as a knockdown because of that revive mechanic I mentioned earlier. And so, we literally went AFK and we just kept the game running overnight. And when I woke up in the morning, we were on the next phase, where Harlow's health doesn't go down until you grab the mutagen and go into super rage mode again. Now thankfully, unlike the Ferry station, this time I could still receive damage while I was in my superpowers mode, because otherwise it wouldn't really be a boss fight. We were getting ready to just go AFK again, but then some extra zombies started spawning in, including a couple of bosses, but luckily those guys were not immune to fire, so we slowly convinced them to incinerate themselves one by one. So yeah, once those guys were taken care of, we went straight back to the AFK strat, with Harlow taking even less backfire damage in the final phase. And I'm not gonna lie to you guys, 24 hours went by and she'd barely taken any damage, although she was taking damage, but it was just so little, so we sped things up a bit by punching her in the face a few times, getting her down to low health, and then we let her finish herself off. And even with that just little pixel of health left in her health bar, that took 2 hours for her to clear out. Look, I'm not proud that we took a shortcut, okay, and that we sped things up, but neither of us were all that keen to keep the game going for weeks straight. So can you beat Dead Island Riptide completely as a pacifist? I'm gonna say yes. Yes, you can. Even with Harlow, it's theoretically possible. She still takes backfire damage, but you just have to be a much better and more patient man than me to find out. And you can also use the link below to sign up to War Thunder for free and jump straight into the action on your platform of choice. And make sure you don't forget about that cheeky bonus package with premium vehicles and boosters. You know what? I think I'm gonna hop in a tank and detox after being such a pacifist for this video. See you guys.